This show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network.
To join our community Discord or see more content from our members, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Dragon Mind, the TTRPG podcast where we discover our best selves through gaming. Today, we're continuing our D&D 2024 Practical Possibilities coverage by looking at backgrounds and origin feats in the new Player's Handbook. Before moving on, if you want to hear weekly discussions of TTRPG design and philosophy, check out the Untitled TTRPG podcast I do with Rel over on his YouTube channel and on Spotify. And if you want to contact me directly, you can message me in the Darkmoor Podcast community Discord or email me at dragonmindpodcast@gmail.com, all linked in the description below. So in D&D 2014, backgrounds were added to race and class as a character creation element, offering some minor mechanical features to represent who your character was before developing or learning the features provided by their class. Overall, these features were fairly minor. Your background offered 2 skill proficiencies and 2 in some combination of language, tool, gaming set, or vehicle proficiencies. Your character would also get some adventuring gear and a ribbon feature that rarely came up naturally in gameplay, without the DM designing a situation specifically about it. The 2014 Player's Handbook had a good number of backgrounds to select, and as any optimizer would tell you, some of them were more beneficial than others. Some liked taking the noble background because it would offer extra starting gold, while some liked guild artisan because it came with artisan's tools. Interestingly enough, the 2014 PHB had a small, easily missed section about customizing backgrounds. I remember an interview with Jeremy Crawford long before the announcement of 1D&D, where he said that custom backgrounds were actually intended to be the default, with the options that we were shown in the Player's Handbook being examples of how to use the background customization system. However, due to the book's formatting, most players assumed that they had to pick one of the pre-made options. So imagine my delight when, in the playtest, custom backgrounds were exactly what we were presented with. They were the default with simple rules for crafting who your character was, with some examples listed afterward. Not only that, but the bonus gear got balanced, so one background wouldn't start with more gold than another. Now, interestingly, the final product ended up going the exact opposite direction. Now, the 16 backgrounds in the PHB all have fixed properties. There are no rules for customizing backgrounds, at least rules that aren't hidden. In the old 2014 issue, where certain species, because they had fixed ability score increases, mixed only well with certain classes, has just been moved over to backgrounds. Like 2014, backgrounds in 2024 also offer 2 skill proficiencies. Rather than choosing between languages, tools, gaming sets, what have you, each background also has 1 tool proficiency, which is nice given that there are actually crafting rules in the game now. Some of them are still musical instruments or gaming set proficiencies, but they at least have some semblance of rules attached to them, as opposed to being this thing you write on your character sheet and never touch again. For those of you who loved languages, don't worry, every character is trilingual by default, the rules of which are in character creation. Now, the big changes to backgrounds that give them more mechanical weight are that they also have an origin feat and ability score increase. Now, each background we're given in the Player's Handbook has 3 ability scores tied to it, and you can either bump each of these 3 scores by 1, or pick a score to bump by 2 and a second score to bump by 1. Now, I don't think this method is illogical, but it does restrict the kind of builds many DMs will see. For example, the farmer background has ability score bumps to strength, constitution, or wisdom. I think this fits, but I'd be surprised to see farmer wizards or farmer sorcerers for any group with at least a twinge of optimization. And unfortunately, this also means that the origin feats are locked to certain ability scores. So, for example, Farmer is the only background with the tough feat. Now, obviously, because the backgrounds are templatized, it is easy enough for a DM to just allow mixing and matching for players that want it. Jeremy Crawford, I think, or Chris Perkins, one of them, hinted that the Dungeon Master's Guide will have rules for custom backgrounds, even though I think they are kind of obvious. And it's interesting that they now feel that DMs need to be engaged with custom backgrounds if they want to allow it. For me, that would have made way more sense in 2014, since the background features back then were so much more loosey-goosey than the highly structured, obviously mechanical origin feats that we get in 2024. That being said, as I alluded to earlier though, we do have some quote-unquote hidden rules to make custom backgrounds now. On page 38, there's a sidebar titled Backgrounds and Species from Older Books. Here, they acknowledge that backgrounds are just different, and that if a player is using a background from an older book, to just do what I said. Put the ASIs wherever you want, tack on an origin feat of your choice. It's this very backdoor hidden way to customize your background, and it feels kind of silly to have it tucked away in a sidebar in character creation, rather than in the character origin section. So, for example, if you don't like the 2024 Acolyte, I guess you can just say, I'm going to use the 2014 Acolyte, and then use the customize your background rule from 2014, and then just tack on the ASIs and the origin feat wherever I want anyway. Whatever. If you're a player like me, and you really want to use custom backgrounds, just do your due diligence for your DM and let them know ahead of time. Some DMs may be passionate to try to play 2024 rules as written. And so, even though it might not be ideal for you, I think it would do a lot better for your experience to at least be a little open to trying it, even if it does feel restrictive. And personally, I've been telling my players to use the customizing background rules for years, and that's what I plan to continue doing going forward. Oh, again, little art note. Man, the art direction in this book is so good. I love how the art for each of the backgrounds is just a background. As easy as it can be to rag on Hasbro for the OGL debacle or Chris Cox deciding that AI is inevitable, I really don't want us as a community to lose sight of the fact that this product is obviously made with a lot of love. I think it would have been easy enough for the design team to just kind of mail it in, but I can see how much care they put into it. So, haters, be gone with you. So anyways, whether you're choosing your background with the rules as written, or if you're going to open yourself up to customization like I am, besides the ASIs, the most significant mechanic granted by your background is going to be the origin feat. In 2024, feats have now been recategorized according to their power level. Origin feats are appropriate for level 1 characters, while most of the notorious feats from 2014, like Crossbow Expert, Great Weapon Master, and Sentinel, now have an explicit 4th level prerequisite. You can take origin feats at higher levels, but I don't think I'd recommend it. And it's also good to consider that if you're planning on playing a human, they can nab a bonus origin feat. Also, right up front, I just want to say, the origin feats are not created equal. Some of them are far more useful than others. I'm not going to rank them or tier them or anything, but I will give my thoughts onto their practical usage as we get to them. So in terms of origin feats, we're starting with Alert. Alert, rather than a +5 bonus like in 2014, now lets you add your proficiency bonus to initiative. The new version also lacks the bullet point that makes your character immune to being surprised. However, there is a new mechanic, which is initiative swap, which lets you swap your initiative with a willing ally as long as neither of you are incapacitated. And I can see, with a little bit of planning, how this can be an absolutely nasty feature. If you have a high dex character able to swap with a low dex character, maybe a cleric or paladin who has a better opening move, this can really be something. As a tangent, Final Fantasy X had this battle system where you had 3 characters in your party to fight, but during each of those characters' turns, you could swap out a party member. And a lot of times it led to these odd situations where you would actually want the character you'd want to move early to not be in your party so that a faster character could swap out with them, kind of like this initiative swap feature. There was this whole strategy in the final secret dungeon of the game where there were these particularly nasty monsters. And Auron's celestial weapon had this first strike feature that basically guaranteed that he would go first at the start of combat. And what you would do is you'd leave Yuna outside of the party. You'd swap Auron and Yuna at the beginning of the battle. Yuna would do a big summon and just wipe them all out in one turn. Of course, it led to this weird thing where now you'd have to go into the menu, make sure Yuna wasn't in the opening party, so that when you went into the next fight, Auron would go first, swap her out again, summon, rinse, wash, repeat. Although that might have sounded like a Final Fantasy tangent, I can see something similar happening with a well-oiled party in this new edition. On its own, I think Alert is a moderately powerful feat that will fit comfortably into any character strategy, but I do think that with the right party composition, this one is extremely powerful. So going in alphabetical order, next up is Crafter. Wah, wah. So there is a fast crafting table, and one of like the premier features of this one is that if you have the tools with the tool proficiency on the fast crafting table, at the end of a long rest, you can just make something that's on the table. So you get 3 tool proficiencies automatically from tools listed on the fast crafting table. There's a 20% discount on non-magical items. And of course, there's this ability to fast craft, MacGyver something for your adventure. Honestly, for most games, I don't see this one coming up very often, unless again, your game master goes out of their way to design a scenario where it'll feel useful. But the other way I can see it is if a DM is really interested in running some sort of low magic world. Maybe they even ban the spell casting classes. I can see the fast crafting being kind of a neat way that your character can help them navigate dungeons or get out of jams. I think that this is super flavorful. I think that the design is just impractical. Now, one thing I will say about these new Origin feats, and the feats in the player's handbook in general, is that there would often be these designs in 2014 where a feat had a counterintuitive purpose. For example, the old crossbow expert feat had a bullet point that basically said ranged attacks can be made without disadvantage if you're within 5 feet of the target. The idea was that if you're a spell casting character that made ranged attacks like Eldritch Blast, maybe you'd take crossbow expert so that you could gain its general benefit. But then what would happen is you'd take feats for reasons other than what the feat implied. So you wouldn't take crossbow expert necessarily if you're a crossbow wielding character. And I think that there has been a strong realignment in terms of what the feat says, and the character you would think would benefit from that feat is honestly the best one to take that feat. And I say this all because healer is definitely better than its predecessor. If you're already a healer, the feat makes you a better one. So the first feature allows you to use an action to utilize a healer's kit to let a creature you're tending to use one of its hit die, adding your proficiency bonus to the roll. Reading it carefully, it makes no mention of the creature getting to add its constitution modifier. It just says that creature can expend one of its hit point dice, and then you roll that die. The creature regains a number of hit points equal to the roll plus proficiency bonus. So my guess is that because this is a fast use of the hit die, rather than getting it during a short rest, the benefit is probably not as great, but I can definitely see its uses, again, especially if it's a low-level game or in a low magic world. It's great for an emergency, especially at low levels, but I think this particular use of the feat will probably become irrelevant once players reach probably 3rd level and beyond. The other benefit is rather minor, but if you roll to heal someone and you roll a 1, you can re-roll it. This is math that's similar to great weapon fighting, and seeing the statistics, it isn't great. Usually on average, you're squeezing out an extra point of healing on average, but sometimes even if the statistics aren't with you, as a player, emotionally, it can be fun to reroll a 1 and then get a high number like a 4 or a 6. But if you really want to lean into your character as a healer, I don't think that the healer feat is terrible. With Magic Initiate also as an option, I just don't think it's the best feat. Moving on to Lucky, which got some serious reworks. Overall, because it's an origin feat, its power has been reduced. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. The old Lucky gave you 3 luck points, and there were some kind of janky mechanics about how the D20 roll would work and how it interacts with advantage, and you can use 1 luck point to cancel out another luck point. Now you just get a number of luck points equal to your proficiency bonus, and you can use a luck point to give yourself advantage on a D20 test or impose disadvantage on an attack roll made against you by another creature. It's also relevant now to talk about Heroic Inspiration, since there's another feat we'll talk about that works with Heroic Inspiration. And Lucky is, in general, less strong than Heroic Inspiration because it's just advantage or disadvantage. In terms of practical use, it's also a little bit selfish because you can only use Lucky for you. But I can see this going well on a rogue build, especially if for whatever reason you're having trouble engaging sneak attack. Now, I've seen arguments online where it's like, well, now rogues have steady aim so they can handle their own sneak attack. But, sometimes you need to give yourself advantage and move in the same turn. So it's nice to have another option. I could also see classes that might struggle defensively picking up Lucky in order to protect themselves a little bit more. And again, it's kind of like Species. I can see Lucky working on any character class. I just think it meshes exceptionally well with rogues. So that being said, the next one we're talking about is Magic Initiate. So early in the 1D&D playtest, there was this experimental idea of universal spell lists, Arcane, Divine, and Primal, from which all other classes drew on. Apparently, survey respondents preferred class spell lists over universal spell lists. It was weird for most people to have, say, like Divine Smite and Searing Smite just be slapped onto the Divine spell list, because those spells tend to be iconic to the Paladin. So it was weird that like Paladins and Clerics just kind of shared spells, even though there were some that were more iconic to specific classes. And to be honest, I was a little sad to see universal spell lists go away. I thought the universal spell lists spoke to how I like to think about Magic, but I understand the design team wanting to go the route that would please the most players. Well, in essence, the universal spell lists are still there, it's just the Wizard, Cleric, and Druid spell lists respectively. And so we'll see a few things of design that used to reference the universal spell lists, now just reference the Wizard, Cleric, and Druid lists. Magic Initiate is one such feature. When you take Magic Initiate, you pick Wizard, Cleric, or Druid, you get 2 cantrips and a first level spell, and that first level spell can be used with spell slots. I really like this solution. The feat is repeatable, the spells can be swapped, and you also get to pick your casting modifier. So, for example, I don't know, if you want to pick up a few arcane spells and cast them with Wisdom, you can. Personally, I think that this is one of the stronger origin feats, and it fits on a lot of different characters. Whether you're a caster like Cleric or Druid and you want to pick up the Shield spell, or you're playing a Wizard and you need to just pick up Healing Word. I've built a few 2024 characters, and I gotta be honest, I can't think of a single one that didn't have this as at least one of the origin feats. Anyway, now we're talking about Musician, which is a new feat for 2024 like Crafter. This is arguably the strongest feat of all of them. You get a musical instrument proficiency, and after a short or long rest, you can grant Heroic Inspiration to a number of allies equal to your proficiency bonus. So just to reiterate, Lucky now just gives you advantage to a D20 test, or allows you to impose disadvantage on an attack against you. Now, in general, Heroic Inspiration, meanwhile, allows any character to reroll any die, including a percentile die, like on the Wild Magic Sorcerer table. And because it's not just die rolls that affect you, I feel like this feat would make it easier for other players to recognize the value of your character earlier, which can build really strong team dynamics, both in and out of game. So, after talking about probably the most powerful origin feat, we get to one of the weakest. Savage Attacker makes its way from the old PHP with no edits. Treant Monk talked about releasing a video soon showing the math behind Savage Attacker and basically why rerolls are a really statistically negligible way to affect damage. That being said, early on in the playtest, I had a player build a barbarian with the Savage Attacker origin feat, and they had a lot of fun with it. Like Healer, sometimes for players, just getting to reroll a die is more psychologically satisfying than building a mathematically more powerful character. So while I can see a lot of optimizers online be like, oh, Savage Attacker, that's an F tier feat, man. If it's going to provide your character more fun and you feel like you can roleplay better by being a Savage Attacker, go for it. Who am I to stop you? Speaking of which, Skilled is the same as it always was. It's 3 proficiencies and skills or tools. It's repeatable. This is one that Treant Monk gave like the big F tier. Skills are now much less useful than they were in 2014. In 2014, things like grappling and shoving were done with athletics and acrobatics checks. And because those are saves now, it really, for the most part, I think, is just going to affect the social interaction and exploration pillars of play. When I first heard that reliable talent from Rogue, which is the one that says if they roll a 9 or below, treat it like a 10. When I heard that it was reduced from getting it at level 11 to level 7, I'm like, that might be really powerful. But it's not if skills mean less. Now, that being said, there are things like hiding is also triggered by a set DC, which I will talk a lot more about when I get to talking about rogues. But overall, I don't think Skilled is a good feat. I think there are plenty of other ways to pick up proficiencies if you want them through multi-classing. And I think that there are just a lot of other juicy options. But again, follow your bliss. If you want a bonus to a bunch of different skills, who am I to stop you? Anyway, one that I will be like, hey, that's a cooler feat, is Tavern Brawler. Tavern Brawler was always one I liked the idea of, but could never justify on my character. But now that it's an origin feat and, you can take a human and get a bonus origin feat, I just think it looks cooler. There are 4 benefits. So first, your unarmed strikes deal 1d4 plus strength modifier bludgeoning damage. Second is that you can reroll ones of unarmed strike damage dice. Again, rerolls aren't great. And if you're playing a monk and you're making 5 attacks a turn at level 10, one of them might end up being a 1. Now, third is that you have proficiency with improvised weapons, which is a change from the 2014 rules, I believe, in that, if the improvised weapon was kind of like a weapon you had proficiency with, you also had proficiency with it. From my interpretation of the rules, now a DM can determine that, but you should assume that if you have an improvised weapon, that you will not have proficiency with it unless you have something like Tavern Brawler. And then the fourth thing is that you can push a creature 5 feet if you hit them with an unarmed strike as part of the attack action on your turn. One of the things I've seen online is, Tavern Brawlers on monks are now viable. And I can see that with the improvised weapon proficiency, the damage rerolls, and also getting to push someone 5 feet with no save, just as part of your normal unarmed strike as part of the attack action. Tavern Brawler is kind of nice. And one of the subclasses I really wanted to see the design team have a second pass at was the Brawler Fighter. But looking at the Tavern Brawler feat, looking at Battle Master, looking at the unarmed fighting style, I think that you can build something that's just as satisfying as the Brawler Fighter. with things that already exist in the system, I don't think you need a whole other subclass in order to make it. A little anticlimactic, but the last origin feat is tough, which is the same as it was in 2014. It's still a decent feat. There's definitely been players at my table, including myself, that have just taken it for the HP boost. It's definitely something I've picked up when building a human in 2024. There's just not a whole lot to comment on it. It's just tough. I do like how feats have been recategorized, and I'm looking forward to playing with some builds as we go. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Dragonmind is a proud member of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. To discover more TTRPG content like this, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com. If you had any insights or questions, be sure to email us at dragonmindpodcast@gmail.com or post in our discussion channel in the Darkmoor Podcast community Discord, linked in the description below. Our theme song, J-Pop, is brought to you by Thesleyan Studios. You can check out more of their awesome work at thesleyanstudios.com. Have an awesome day, and remember, your story matters. Bye-bye now.
Well, Grimton, Morlinde and Ulrich are gone. We're in a new, unfamiliar land of Kolgafir. What's our first move?
Polaris, I'm not too certain, but I did hear Fishbelly talking about something.
Oh, yeah. With the Warlord's half-sister in a meeting.
Yeah, that's about the only lead we have so far. We haven't been here long. Might be worth checking out.
Seems like a plan to me.
Join us as our party explores an unforgiving region of the Cusp and allies with new party members in Arc 3 of Advantage, a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons audio drama focused on storytelling and character development, in the Darkmoor Podcast Network. Find us in your podcast app.